Okay, now let's dive into this, because when I went out and I said, look, what questions should we ask Matt? I want to say there was a torrential outpour of people saying like, thank you. You've impacted my life. Like, I'm now selling millions. I'm doing this. I got freedom for my family. And that's the number one thing that showed up. Okay. Just so you know, right?
That's
number
great.
two. Yeah. Number two is like, okay, let's talk about the Shopify. Let's talk about, you were big, and you're, from that time period, like everyone knew, hey, you actually sold on Amazon. You knew how to sell. You were our guide on Amazon. And then you win and transformed into the Shopify side, right? And now you're bigger success than Amazon is even on Shopify. And there's so many Amazon sellers that are curious, how do you shift, and what is the success dependent on when you do your D2C or Shopify site? And so let's go into that. Like, first, maybe just into your journey. And I know about this a little bit, but just for our audience, like, how did you even get into the D2C in the first place?
So that's where I actually started. When I first started selling, like we talked about, like my very first business, like Amazon was not really a thing. It was tiny back then compared to now anyways. And so I was selling on my own website. So that's where I started, found this opportunity on Amazon, a lot of easy room for growth, high margin stuff. You don't have to spend money on ads. Then we started building amazing, and then didn't have any time to do any of that because I'm like trying to keep the wheels on in this thing that's growing so fast. Uh-huh. And so then, but was still kind of, I guess at the time, like messing around with some Amazon stuff. Had like 1 or 2 accounts suspended. Wasn't, at the time it was kind of Wild West. You could do all kinds of crazy stuff with the reviews. And so some of it was self-inflicted. And then some of it was just when I was like, okay, that's dumb to do that stuff. Some of it was just kind of the uncertainty of the platform at the time. Like you would just get caught up in some sort of like policy change. And then I was like, this kind of sucks. It's like you put in all this time and effort and then it could just be taken away overnight. So that was kind of in my head. And I was like, I'd prefer to go back to selling on my own website and be able to just kind of use Amazon as needed. Now, with all that same tirade, I know you sell majority on Amazon and stuff. At some point, like even before I went back and started building the new brand, Amazon got a lot more stable. It's like you don't usually just get kicked off for some random reason.
No, correct.
It's like,
what it was 2015, 2017, whatever, all that time period, a lot of crazy stuff going on. There's definitely been a lot of stabilization for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So if you do the right things, like you're probably fine. But then on the other side, PPC came along at some point, which was great at the beginning. Now can be very expensive. Then Amazon fees started going up, and then like Amazon went and invited all the Chinese sellers. So it's like you got to really know what you're doing on that platform. And just me, nature, I could never work for somebody else, and so I have a hard time also like feeling like I'm working for Amazon or not having that control. So maybe it's a personality thing. I don't know. And so along the way, I was like looking at Dave Asprey's stuff, Bulletproof founder, reading his blogs and all that kind of stuff. And then he was like, oh yeah, you should drink healthier coffee that's non-toxic. He has these long ass articles back in the day that kind of explain why. And so then I was like in Austin, like looking for the healthiest coffee that he kind of recommended. And I was like, oh, I think this is like a big space like that could blow up. And then I was talking with my current business partner, Charles, and he actually had this brand selling super high-end, like healthy coffee that was just kind of sitting there on the side. He had some supplier issues. His thing was never really like, how do I do all the marketing, get customers in the door? He's really good at like keeping customers, creating products, upselling and that kind of thing. But he didn't have the piece of like getting them in the door, which is what I'm pretty good at. And so I ended up like partnering with him. I was like, hey, if I can help you scale this thing fast, let's do like an equity deal. Like I put no money in, but it's kind of sitting there so that we can grow real fast and I own a good chunk of the business. And so we did that. And that was all Shopify at first. And so we own the customer list, allows me to do all the direct marketing stuff that I learned back in the day on the internet marketing side and kind of refined it amazing because doing launches, you're sending emails and conversion optimization. And so it's all the same kind of skill just applied to e-commerce. And so I was able to apply all of that stuff to grow this brand on Shopify. And so after about a year and a half, we ended up adding Amazon, which is a great channel for us now. But it's like I still like having the core of our business on Shopify. So that's kind of the journey. But yeah, we can get into like how to actually do it if you want.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And so, and I was just listening to your podcast, right? I know you have a limited amount of episodes, but you had a podcast on quality. And you said something which is brilliant, right? Which is the first thing you do when assessing someone's business is what do you have special about your product? How is it more special? What's better about it? Why would somebody buy it over your competitor? And if you don't have an answer, you don't have a business. Like there is nothing there that you're going to blow up and actually do marketing on. And so from what I'm hearing, what you're saying now, like Charles had this whole life boosting that was already very high quality and in a market that was underserved, right? So that's the core. And I just want to make sure everyone understands, like, before you do any marketing, if you don't have a product that is good and worth marketing, you're very, very, very unlikely to succeed. So just putting that out there. Okay, so now with that in mind, like, what was the marketing piece and what made you succeed when before, hey, the product was already there, but it wasn't selling that well?
Yeah, so I think exactly what you just said is the first step. It's like you got to have something unique to say. If you don't have anything unique to say, it's kind of like it's going to be hard selling this thing. It's like, hey, we've got the same exact freaking blue yoga mat, same material, same size, same everything as the one you could sell on Amazon, but please buy ours for 50% more. Like, it doesn't work. So that's one piece, is having something unique to say. And in most cases, though this is maybe not as true going forward, is that in most cases, like, you want a big market. And so then Facebook, like, you can just let it target everyone and it can go find new people, because that's usually the biggest traffic source for DTC. So big market, unique product, unique angle. And so the next step was for us to find out, like, what is the angle that's actually going to, because we know there's a lot of coffee drinkers. We know in general, health is a good market. It's one of the sort of tried and true markets. But what is the angle about this that's actually going to get some random stranger who sees an ad on Facebook to actually want to buy it? So that was the next thing for us to figure out. Before then, we kind of had to make sure we covered all our bases with basic direct marketing stuff, meaning, like, you got to have a good headline. You got to make sure you have your benefits, your features. You got to have a good offer, some scarcity elements, some guarantee, social proof. Like, if you look up any, like, article online, sales letter template or something, you'll see all those basic elements. So that just kind of gets you in the door. So we got all those basic elements, but we still don't know, like, what is the main angle that's going to get some stranger to buy. And so I think this is a good practice, and what I recommend everyone do if they want to try to scale with a product on a display-based platform like Facebook, because on Amazon, people are searching for keywords. You can still do some of this in there, but usually they're looking for a keyword, and there's different ways to sell products. On Facebook, they're not looking for it. So you're, like, grabbing them. And so with that, we basically came up with, like, what do we think are, like, the 5 to 10 reasons somebody could buy? And so it's just kind of throwing stuff against the wall. The more marketing I've done, the more I realize you never know what's going to work. And so it's kind of like, I may think that it's because, we support the environment, we support the farmers, maybe because Charles is a doctor, maybe because the coffee is low acid, or we may take the fear angle and say all other coffees are toxic. And so it's like, we're kind of throwing ideas against the wall. And then we're like, okay, like, how do we take the sales page that covers all our basic elements, but then we just change the top part and then change the ad to say that, like, okay, all coffee is toxic, you should buy our coffee. And then another ad in top angle says, our coffee has a super low acidity. That's what the ad and the page says. And then the rest, 90% of the page is exactly the same. Still covers basic features, benefits, testimonials, that kind of thing. But we're trying to find, like, what is that big element that's going to flag down people and make them want to buy on the spot. So that was the first thing that we tested. And then we ended up kind of narrowing down.
So, but hold on. Okay, now, because I want to actually do this, right? This is something, I need this for me now. Okay. This 90% of the page, did you test that already? Or that part, you just assume it's going to be good? Like, how do you, like, when should you change the hook part and when should you change that 90% of the body?
I think you have to do the 90% of the body well. And, by this point, this was like an advantage Charles and I had. He had done a bunch of direct marketing. I had done a bunch of direct marketing. We'd both been in the game for like 10 years. And, it's kind of a weird stat or fact, I guess, is that I, other than the first launch, wrote every single piece of copy pretty much for Amazing Selling Machine. So you could argue, like, I'm one of the top selling copywriters, like, ever in history or whatever. But it's like the last thing
I would argue that for sure. I would argue that.
Yeah. So the last thing I'd ever want to do is, like, write paid copy for other people. But it's like, it is what it is. So it kind of refined this skill for so many years, but it's all the same stuff. Like, if you bought any of the good copywriting books, like, buy one of the ones by that, there's that Jim Edwards guy that I think works with Russell Brunson. And then there's like Ray Edwards, I think unrelated, another copywriter. If you buy one of their books, they'll teach you all the basics, but it's kind of like all those elements that I just kind of rattled off. And so those things you need to have there, but that's not the first thing I would test. Like, as long as you're literally like a checklist covering all those elements, you got lots of reviews and stuff like that, then the big thing I think you have to test first is like that main core angle, or some marketers will call it like a hook. Like, what is that thing that's going to like grab people and make them be like, oh yeah, I should pay attention to this thing. And then you get them to like pay attention, and then they read all the rest of your stuff. And then if you do all that stuff right, they buy. So we're kind of making sure we cover those things, not testing them at first. You can test them later, but cover those things and then test the big thing first.
Okay. Test the hook. And what do you consider the hook? Is that just the beginning of the video, the whole content of the video, the headline? Like, how would you, and again, I know it changes and whatever, but when you look at how much do you want to be changing? Do you want to change the first few seconds of the video? You want to change the whole video? You want to change how much?
I think it's almost easier, and you can tell me if you think this kind of metaphor example makes sense, is that I think it's almost easier. Like if there was like if you were in a coffee shop and there was like a customer sitting over, a potential customer, you're like, okay, this person's like in the right market and stuff. They're a good potential buyer. They don't know who you are. They don't know your product. If you only had 20 seconds to talk to them, like what would you tell them is the reason they should buy your product? For example, like if you have some new fancy yoga mat that's like you found that like all the yoga people are super upset because they slip on the mats, and you know the person does yoga, and you're like, hey, I've got this new mat that like you'll never slip once. And they're like, okay, now I'm listening. And then you're like, oh, by the way, it's got a good price and it's got a guarantee and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like that thing that you would use to go grab some random stranger. And if you had 20 seconds to tell them why they should buy your product, I mean, that's kind of what I consider a hook. I've never seen like a definition that I really like, but that's kind of what I consider. And so for me, it's like that core sales reason. And like I said, for us, it's like, you'll have ideas. Like for any of your products, if you sat down with like just one member of your team, and you don't need a million of these, but if you came up with 5 to 10, like what is the main reason? What is the main benefit? What is the main feature of our product that you think that if we had to focus on that, that would sell more than anything else? And then you're going to have a bunch of guesses. Like I think there's very low likelihood that you could do that 10 times in a row and be able to pick the winning one, even half of the time.
Right. Yeah, because you're not your audience, and who knows, right? But as you're saying, I love that. Okay, good. What would you go and tell somebody at the coffee shop? And so in that, how do you format it in the ad? So again, I mean, I don't know the exact statistic, but I think the scrolling like on a TikTok or on a Facebook or whatever, well, Facebook it's longer, but on TikTok, I don't know, each video gets viewed an average of like 0.9 seconds or something ridiculous, right? Yeah. So does it need to like just grab them to see the rest of it, and then you get that message across in the first, you're saying like 20 seconds, 10 seconds. And tactically, when you said, I mean, look, I love the definition. And now how would I start testing that? You change entire videos, you change the first 20 seconds, kind of like what you're talking about, or you change the first half a second, like how much are you getting? And of course, this have multiple answers, I'm sure, but generally speaking, I want to go and promote my coffee machine. What do you suggest for me?
Yeah. So I would say, unless your product's over like $100, I'd probably skip the video on the landing page. If it's over $100,
skip the video on the landing page, or skip the video on the ad itself?
On the landing page.
Okay. Skip video on the landing page.
If it's under $100, because it's more of an impulse purchase. It's kind of somewhat arbitrary, but then I don't think you need it. And I think people are more likely to do a bad job on the video than a good job and just waste money. But then on the ad, I think you just start with, because you're trying to test the main angle. You're not necessarily trying to do a bunch of ad testing. So you just want an ad that fits that angle. And so for us, like we got away from this ad. I didn't want the risk, but I was like, one angle is the low acidity of the coffee. So then I literally like thought of this idea. I was like, created a little chart that plotted like us and other brands on a pH scale. And I was like, okay, like, Starbucks, acidic, Dunkin' Donuts, whatever. So that was just trying to represent this in like an image. And I think that's fine to get started. Like you don't have to go, you're just trying to test the broad angle, not trying to create the world's best creative. And so I would think.
And in this case, that was an image, just an image ad instead of a video.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook changes. Like sometimes like when we, the first, 3 years of scaling the business, like I was dialed in on the Facebook sort of meeting with our guy like every week. And you would go through these phases of like, 3 months where it's like images are working better. Then the next 3 months, videos are working better. So it's like not guaranteed that video is going to work better. Sometimes images work fine. And so I think also just like a little clip showing that benefit or that angle, just whatever kind of represents that idea, I think is good enough to get started. And then have your little headline text and have the post text just kind of match that. And then once you really kind of figure out like which angle's working, then you can start getting more creative. It's
testing on ads. So first you're doing a general test. Okay, you don't have to do 10 different types. You just do it like as a general message. Does it communicate that message? Check maybe 10, 15 different headlines or different angles, right? What are you going to tell that person? Make sure it pretty much communicates that well, and do a bunch of them. See what does best. So now you're changing image and or video, right? You're talking about your call to action, that little description in the text. All of that would kind of go after that angle. And then on your landing page, okay, you're saying sub $100, don't include a video sales letter or anything like that. Just, maybe direct product page or some sort of landing page. And then on there, how much of that beginning part should be approximately also going into that same thing you just talked about in the ad?
I would say just the headline and then the first few paragraphs or bullets, whatever you have at the top of the page. And if there's like an image up there, maybe make that fit the ad also, so there's congruency. Mm-hmm. But for us, we would literally just change the headline. And then at the time, it would go from headline to like this, from the desk of Dr. Charles. And so I would change a little bit of that, like a couple paragraphs, and like that was it. Like that was the only thing that would change for the angle. Nice.
That's brilliant. Okay. I'm going to have to try this. And what do you do? And again, this is a little bit in the weeds or whatever, but how much dollars do you have to spend on an ad, and what metric are you seeing? Like, oh, this hook is pretty good, and then we like this angle versus the other angle. So if I did 10 tests, like, what shows you what's better?
Yeah, I think in general, especially if this is new for you, you're pretty much always starting at like a low budget. Like, you have one campaign this is technical, but like not using campaign budget optimization on Facebook, which means that you control the ad set spend. And so one campaign, no campaign budget optimization, 5 ad sets, basically 1 ad per ad set, all targeting the same audience. The only thing different is like the ad and the landing page go to a certain angle, but otherwise the ad sets are all the same. Start each of those like $20 a day, I think is fine. And then just make sure, because what's going to happen is like 9 times out of 10, something's going to be screwed up with the conversion tracking at first. So you find that out after spending a couple $100 instead of a couple $1,000. And so as you kind of sort through those things, you're like, okay, like maybe it's not profitable, but it's like the numbers are at least correct. And then you go from there. And so in most cases, like you'll start seeing some clear losers, some clear winners, and then maybe some in between. And so you probably are going to want, I don't know, maybe at least 100 transactions until you can really sort of pick a winner.
Wow, 100 transactions on. You're talking about 100 transactions on the winner while they're all running, or 100 transactions to say total?
I would say total. Okay. It really depends, because it's like if you had one that is just blowing everything out of the water and everything else is terrible, it's like, congratulations. It's like your decision is easy. If you've got, they're all doing terrible, then maybe go back to the drawing board and need some different angles. If you've got, 2 that are terrible and then 3 that are kind of in the middle, then it's like those you're probably going to have to run longer to get any sort of statistical significance. It's a somewhat art, somewhat science, but it's like you don't want to call it too early and be like, oh, we found it. But then you've only had like 20 transactions total, and you're like, you get 3 more transactions, and all of a sudden it's a different one's a winner. So that's where you're trying to avoid.
Right.
And there's little calculators online that'll be like, if you Google, like Neil Patel has one, statistical significance calculator. It's like you can literally plug your conversions and that sort of thing in there. And it'll tell you like, has this reached statistical significance? So that's one way to do it.
Okay, nice. Awesome. Okay, excellent. So now let's talk about briefly, what kind of success have you seen in LifeBoost, right? Like if you can share, right, what was it kind of at the beginning, and then where are you guys at now?
So when I partnered up with Charles to kind of say, if I can help grow this business, I own a part of the business. If I don't, the business is yours. Like we part ways. That was 2019, January of 2019. The year before, the business did about $200,000 in sales. Then we went January of 2019, the business was doing $17,000 a month in sales that month. And then by the end of the year, it was like $569,000 or something. And so
for the year or for a month?
For that month. And so,
oh wow.
Yeah. So I think that whole year we did like $2.5 million. And then that was 2019. Then 2020, it was a pandemic, but I don't think that we had this massive lift because of the pandemic. It's just because we happened to be scaling our ads at the time. And so that next year, we did, I'm starting to lose track now, 16 million, I think. Yeah. And then that gets to 2020. And then like today we do basically 40 million a year. Amazing. I feel like I've recited these numbers of like, we did this year, this year, then now, but it's been like a year or 6 months since I've had to do it. So, so I know like we did like 2.5 million. Then basically now we do like 40 million a year.